Cool. So we're now going to move on to somebody who doesn't really probably need much introduction to many followers of Master Investor. Greg Bailey is one of the founders of Juvenescence. And as we all know, Juvenescence has been at the forefront of the longevity field for some time, especially since 2018 when I was cycling around Norway. So Greg's here today. Hey, Greg, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you, Phil?
Yeah, really great, great. And just looking at your website, as I would always do, just to kind of get a feel as to what are the right questions to be asking you, I was delighted to see that you've got in 2025, you're on track to have five therapeutics in either phase one, which is safety, or phase two, which is safety and efficacy trials with disease intervention. So that's big news. Should we unpack that? That's brilliant.
Wherever you'd like to start. But yeah,
Oh,
we're truly excited.
yeah, well, I guess what would you say? I mean, obviously, looking at the asset, let's take the one that's at phase two, because obviously that'll be something that you'll be telling investors about your progress on that. So what is that therapeutic, and where are you targeting it?
I presume you're talking about ligenesis and the liver transplants,
I would,
or
yes, yeah, yeah,
um, so I mean, it always amazes me how scientists come up with ideas. So the the institute at McGowan Research Institute at University of Pittsburgh is the inventor of the liver transplant, and they the problem is, and I'm sure it's similar numbers for Europe. There's about 200,000 Americans who are liver failure. There's 8,000 livers that are donated a year. 2,000 can't be harvested in time and reach the recipient or fit as far as immunological status. So what they came up with was the idea of taking these 2,000 livers, dividing a liver into 75 aliquots, proliferating it, and injecting that into the lymph nodes, the paraduodenal lymph nodes, for those of you who are scientists, around the liver. And in 400 animal studies, they were able to prevent the animals from dying from liver failure. We've now dosed 4 patients without side effects. A huge discrepancy in the transplant, which is 8 hours, $800,000, versus a 15-minute endoscopy and day surgery in and out, and a dramatically different price point. And obviously 2,000 livers times 75 would be 150,000 patients you could treat. So yeah, amazing. And I'm always curious, Phil, how they came up with the idea of injecting it into a lymph node,
I know.
what other places they decided to try first.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and
anyway,
I know
it
that
worked out.
there's a trajectory, Greg, for that science that's just going beyond liver disease, right? So there's a pathway for this to become much more backed into the longevity agenda, as I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't do beta islet cells for the pancreas with the potential to reverse somebody out of type 1 diabetes. Additionally, obviously, post-COVID, we're all too aware of the fact of immunosenescence, the aging of the immune system. Could we take the thymus, re-inject it into lymph nodes, and regenerate, the elderly's immune system? And what really surprised me is they can also do it with the kidney, because I was trying to figure out how they, connected to the ureter, but they have figured out a workaround for that as well. So very, very exciting.
Yeah, and of course you've got other things in your portfolio too, which are all very interesting. I'd like to talk to you about one of your assets in just a moment, but I guess like many organizations, you're capital intensive. So how have you
Unfortunately.
found because it's an investment show, right? So how have you found the investment marketplace over the last couple of years? I mean, it's been tough for a lot of people. I'm sure you're not immune to that, but how are investors responding to this clinical progress and likewise the work that you're doing in the broader field of longevity?
Yeah, it's been torturous last 2 years.
Right.
Definitely a biotech winter. And understandably, if you're looking at investments and you can get, 5.3% on a T-bill, why gamble, here, particularly when you're used to zero on any interest rates.
Yeah.
So, we need to recalibrate. And I think we need a few home runs, and then you're going to get FOMO. And then people will rush back in. Obviously, BioAge has been a real feather in the cap of the sector. It's doing well, robustly trading post IPO. So I think things are changing, and the drugs are going to come fast and furious now. I think we're at a major inflection point. So any of you investors who are listening, this is a golden opportunity because the valuations have been so badly beaten up. So we've had a tough time. I think we have now turned a corner as well. Richard Marshall or David Gill at Juvenescence can talk to you about that. But I think that we're going to be able to get to our next, major capital raise, which is a further 100 million
Great. Well,
of dollars.
congrats and good luck with that, Greg. And I guess
Thank you.
you've already referred to something that I feel is very interesting, specifically from your portfolio too, because you've got this asset GDF15, which is addressing muscle wastage. Now, of course, we're all aware now through the GLP-1s, Wegovy, Ozempic, this whole weight loss craze, this whole phenomena in our industry, which is kind of a stepping stone to longevity, right?
100%.
Yeah, but
First anti-aging drug, Ozempic.
yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like, well, I'm interested to know, is that asset going to be potentially backing into that class like BioAge, for example, with their sarcopenia
Yeah.
asset?
Lilly, Novo Nordisk, Viking, all of them are scrambling to figure out this element that 15 to 20% of the weight loss is actually muscle,
Yeah.
and how do they mitigate that, which is not tragic in a young person, but it's hugely problematic as we age with sarcopenia. So, yeah, I think it's an absolute fit. It's also a fast follower. Pfizer is using GDF15 in cardiovascular patients. And since it's a 400 patient study, they must have seen a heck of a signal to do a phase 2 400 patient study. So we've got to get that one into the clinic as quickly as possible and
Yeah.
follow along. And then, as you say, the element is anything that can mitigate this muscle wasting will be warmly received by the people who have the GLP-1s, the GLP-1s.
Yeah, because I guess it's kind of that moment that, I mean, I talked about a GPT moment. It's not going to happen overnight. This is going to take time. But with Juvenescence as a prime example, with these assets coming through the clinic, working on these aging drivers, we're getting very close to the next aging therapeutic, right? Beyond GLP-1s. And of course, this is the time where we're going to see that explosion in the industry that we've all been waiting for, right?
Yeah, and for the investors, I think it's a major inflection point. We have 2 drugs. One just finished a human trial. One is in a human trial, which if we're right and it's not toxic, will add 10 healthy years to your life on a reasonable human model that shows that if you knock down that pathway, you see that sort of change in health span, which is the most important thing, I think, for all of us. And so, yes, and I'm sure there's lots of people you're interviewing and talking to who are similarly working. Obviously, the 2 people who've been on the call already with the senolytics and the Yamanaka factors. So huge moment for us and enormous for investors. Because the one thing about the GLP-1s, I mean, just about any analyst you read talking about them says it's $150 to $200 billion a year market. What, Phil, would a drug that gave you 10 healthy years, how big would that market be per year? Give me a number.
Yeah, there's probably got too many zeros for the call, right? But I guess at the end of the day, this is going to happen, and I guess it's quite interesting the Juvenescence approach that you have, because it's a kind of mix of different business models, and I know
Very much
in the past that you've been working in grass generally regarded as safe assets, and you've got your ketone products, and it's kind of interesting to me that you're taking your science into the therapeutic sphere, into the clinical sphere, but likewise also into the consumer marketplace. So is this something that you're interested in pursuing, or are you going to be divesting these types of assets to continue in therapeutics, or is consumer sort of part of your game plan?
Richard Marshall and the board will obviously dictate it, but my personal instinct is I think everybody who's listening in, all of our panelists and yourself as well, will know that, presumably you're going to have to take products for an awfully long period of time. So they're going to need to be incredibly safe. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to see a blurring of the line between natural products and pharmaceuticals, supplements, foods, whatever, medical foods, whatever you want to call it, because it's going to have to be so safe. And as you said, with your own supplement opportunity that you're pursuing, that this is going to be a huge market. And people always ask me, is this going to be only for the wealthy? Phil, if we have a supplement that we can make for 5 cents, whatever currency you're dealing with, and you sell it for $1 a day, I'm wagering that there's over 1 billion people globally who could afford that price point. If it's going to significantly change my health trajectory and how long I live healthy, you make $365 billion a year.
Yeah,
Now it's
yeah.
not going to be one drug, but I mean, these numbers aren't crazy, and you don't have to charge as much money as the GLP-1s to get to home plate. So yeah, this is a huge, huge opportunity for the sector. And as you say, there's a number of supplements that have, drug-like qualities. By the way, hopefully the FDA didn't hear that. When I say drug,
Yeah, I know. I think we all get what you mean. That they're very powerful, and they do have clinical application, right? And I guess the very interesting thing with some of those assets is, will they stay at the same price point if they go into a therapeutic pathway? Because obviously that's what we want, right? Because as you mentioned, there are all these people in developed societies that are aging. There isn't the population pyramid in these countries to support those future populations, those aging populations. And I guess a question for you, and it's an interesting question that also came in from Sophia. So when you're speaking to investors, are you making a sort of black and white commercial discussion with them, or are investors with their ESG, CSR, whatever their perspective is, are they taking a holistic view on what these are going to do to society as well?
originally, most of the money we've raised has been from ultra high net worths, family offices. You and I have kidded about it. No surprise that wealthy people want to live longer. They're having a good time. They want to stay here. So
Yeah,
I think that they have, personal reasons. And then there's some family offices which clearly have interest with respect to their sons and daughters and family, because these drugs hopefully will be priced for everybody. So I think you do see both. And then you have the institutions, and they're supposed to deliver a return to their
yeah,
investors. So it's quite a wide spectrum. I think the institutional players are gradually coming back to this. They want to see human data. So that's a huge dilemma for all of us on this call, and our industry in general, is they want human data. And
yeah.
so that we got to get there, which is why, as you said, we want to have 5 in the clinic next year.
Great. Well, I think tangentially we've answered Sophia's question. So, Greg, I've got another question, which is probably a little bit of a down one, but it's an up one as well. I had a look at your site and I saw that really there'd been very little communication activity over the last year or so. So that tells me that you guys are in the tunnel and there's something exciting, we would hope down the line. So, is there anything you can kind of share with us as to how you feel about 2025?
I think it's a huge inflection point for us and for the industry, as you and I have just been discussing.
Yeah.
Um, that human data. I mean, the extraordinary thing about we have the product is a PI1 inhibitor. And
Yeah.
what we know is there's a population that has a heterozygous SERPINE1 gene, which means their PI1 is diminished. Those people live 10 years longer than people in their community. And it's a very tight religious community. So they're eating the same, they're sleeping the same, they're working out the same. So we have created a drug to knock down the PI1 pathway. So
Yeah.
the amazing thing about that was in a phase 1 trial. It's usually just to prove safety, but it also is a biomarker. We can actually measure PI1.
Yeah.
So partway through this phase 1 trial, I will know if we have a therapeutic dose that's not toxic, that knocks down PI1. And that if I'm right, and the team is right, Juvenescence, this adds 10 healthy years.
Mhm.
And then we go back to that number I just asked you, how much money will that generate per annum if it's doing that?
Yeah. Well, Greg, obviously we could go on all day. I love talking with you about the scale of Juvenescence, which is really phenomenal. So you're going to be around for the panel session at the end. So I really appreciate it, Greg. Thanks for joining us so far.